Every week we gather round, stories start to flow. Eric and Mark are on the mic, ready for the show.
Welcome to another Seesaw Scenario with the Eric and Mark Playground Rules podcast. The scenario reads as follows. My wife and I recently attended a marriage seminar. As always, any opportunity to spend intentional time together is time well spent, and I sincerely appreciated several thoughtful insights the speaker shared. That said, I left reflecting on a few concerns about the overall framing. At one point, the love of Jesus was presented almost exclusively as gentle affirmation, and women were encouraged to evaluate their husbands in a way that felt close to a pass-fail scale. However, encouragement and accountability both matter deeply in marriage. Something to note is that when Christ's love is described primarily in affirming terms, it can risk narrowing a much fuller biblical picture. Scripture portrays Christ's love for the church as both compassionate and corrective, not just compassionate or just corrective. His love restores, but it also refines. It comforts, and it calls upward. Genuine love is not passive. It is invested in growth and alignment with truth. When affirmation is emphasized without equal attention to responsibility on both sides, an unintended balance can develop. And it has developed throughout society. In a healthy marriage, neither spouse's primary role is to grade the other. Both are called to invest, to grow, to examine themselves. Lighthearted humor about one spouse constantly correcting the other, whether about dishes or daily habits, may seem harmless, yet repeated narratives shape expectations over time. Over time, they can normalize subtle patterns of criticism or defensiveness rather than encourage mutual understanding and respect. It is often said that one person can save a relationship. In some circumstances, one spouse's maturity and steadfastness can indeed stabilize a struggling marriage. Even so, lasting restoration ultimately requires participation from both parties. Stability may begin with one, but flourishing requires two. There's also an important theological nuance in the instruction for husbands to love their wives as Christ loves the church. The church, biblically understood, is a body of believers who willingly align themselves with Christ. That context underscores that biblical marriage presumes shared belief, shared commitment, and shared responsibility. A believer is not merely someone who affirms a truth, but someone who orders life in response to it. My aim is not to question the authority of Scripture, which I hold to be enduring, reliable, and irrefutable. Rather, my concern is that imbalance can arise whenever expectations are placed primarily on one spouse. In conflict resolution, when one party carries clearly defined obligations while the other's responsibility remain less articulated and unchecked, sustainable peace becomes difficult. Marriage flourishes not when one evaluates and the other performs, but when both approach the covenant with humility, accountability, and a shared commitment to grow. As a society, we have often joked, sometimes for decades, about the dynamic of one spouse as a critic and the other as a perpetual course corrector. Humor can reveal truth, but it can also reinforce assumptions. When cultural narratives consistently empower one gender to cast judgment while the other is expected to absorb, adjust, and endure, sometimes to the point of quiet resentment, it does not cultivate health, nor does it honor the dignity of either husband or wife. Mutual respect means that both spouses are held to standards of kindness, self-control, and responsibility. It also means that both are granted the space to express concerns without being dismissed or labeled. A marriage grounded in biblical principles should elevate both partners, not corner one into silence or perpetual self-defense. The strongest marriages I have observed are not built on imbalance, but on reciprocity. Two people equally committed to becoming better for one another and before God. I'll say it, Mark.
Eric, so this is a very important topic with a lot of depth. It's hard to cover it in several minutes, but I'm glad that you did bring it up, and I'm glad that we are covering it in our seesaw scenario for our audience. At least some of the main thoughts that I have. So I completely agree regarding mutual accountability. There's really no other way. I think that a lot of people and a lot of times why marriages fail, these days are a struggle regardless of which spouse, is at fault for whatever element of conflict or instance of conflict. I think that a lot of times people are approaching marriage and relationships these days from a standpoint of entitlement. Well, it's kind of like, one dating scenario that I had years ago. I just kind of felt like there was something constantly hanging over me. It was like I had been with somebody who was a relationship with somebody who had been divorced. And I guess the divorce was still relatively fresh, and she seemed like she was ready to, in a lot of ways to move on. And in a lot of ways, we had a good relationship and everything, good communication. But it was always this air of, well, her ex-husband wronged her in so many ways, and heck, if she was ever going to make that same mistake ever again. So it's like I ended up carrying, I felt like, this heavy burden of proof to let her know, hey, I'm not the same guy that your husband is. I'm not going to make the same mistakes. I'm not going to make you feel the same way. So if I did anything that even remotely sounded like him, whether it was like, speaking out, a manner of speaking or articulation or a common interest in something, it's just like, it seemed like it was, I don't want to say used against me, but maybe it was, it kind of stacked up against my cause. So let's say, for example, if I took an interest in and there's a lot of basis for comparisons as it turned out. So let's say, for example, I would come in and say, oh, well, I'm a really big sports fan. I want to watch my teams and that kind of thing. It's like, oh, you're starting to remind me of my husband. My ex-husband, he was a big sports fan too. Or took an interest, for example, in the stock market. Oh, that's all my husband did all day was, look at the stock market, trade, this kind of thing, that kind of thing. And not even that was really back then even heavily into the stock market at that point, but just the fact that I even brought up the stock market reminded her of him and that kind of thing, which again, maybe speaks to it all being a little bit too fresh. But I sometimes feel like the accountability is one-sided, or the burden of proof falls on, one member of the relationship or of the marriage. It needs to be a dual thing. It needs to be mutual. In order for us to have a non-playground scenario, we need to be able to balance the scales between the roles in the relationship, the roles in the households. And sometimes those roles don't have to be traditional roles. They can be defined within, within whatever element that the two people decide they should be defined. So maybe one of the people, maybe both spouses want to work and help take care of the home, or maybe one person wants to take care of the home mostly and tend to the children, while the other person, is spending most of their, daylight hours working or whatever. So it's just like, it's up to every couple to decide. Again, it doesn't have to be a traditional thing, but people have to be comfortable in their roles. And that's one thing that I realized, is that not only do you have to like yourself individually, you have to like who you are in that relationship. If you don't like who you are in that relationship, or being kind of pressured to not like yourself, or constantly made to feel like you're falling short, it will inevitably have a taxing and toxic effect on your overall well-being, on your overall perspective. And mutual accountability is the only way to go. I believe that, parents should hold their children accountable to some degree. Children should hold their parents accountable. Siblings should hold each other accountable to some degree. I believe, again, people in relationships, marriages should hold accountability. I think that, and then I think that, we as people, for those of us who practice faith or whatever, even on a casual level, we believe we have an accountability before God. We really have an accountability towards, or should have accountability to every person in our life who matters to us to some degree. And once those scales of accountability are thrown out of whack, or somebody has this attitude, well, screw you, I don't answer to anybody kind of thing, while they expect you to, answer to them to some degree, or fulfill some kind of standard, or fulfill some kind of void, or fill some kind of void, I should say, then again, the scales are thrown completely off balance. Not a good place to be. Then you start to get in toxic playground scenarios. We need to do everything possible to avoid those, because we know how those make us feel.